The manager's voice cracked across the hotel lobby like a slap. "Get that filthy animal out of my building, now." At the front desk, a Marine in a rain-soaked jacket stood very still, one hand resting on a cane and the other wrapped around the harness of a German Shepherd pressed tight against his leg. He did not raise his voice. He had asked, quietly, twice, for the room he had reserved 3 months before. The dog had not barked and had not growled. He had only leaned harder into the man's side the louder the shouting got, doing the exact job he'd been trained for years to do. A handful of late-night travelers watched from beside the elevators and said nothing, the way people do. And Parker Lowe, red-faced behind that desk and certain he held every card in the building, had not the faintest idea that the screaming he was doing at a disabled man's service dog would cost him the entire hotel before the sun came up. Before we go any further, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay with it until the very end. We read every single comment, and we'd love to know how far this one travels tonight. The Marine's name was Gunnery Sergeant Travis Ford, and 3 years ago he had been one of the most capable men in any room he walked into. He was 38 years old, built thick through the shoulders and chest, with close-cropped sandy hair and a steady, unhurried way of carrying himself that 14 years in the Corps had welded into his bones. He walked with a cane now, and his left leg below the knee was titanium and carbon fiber, and there was a scar that ran up the side of his jaw into his hairline from the same blast that had taken the leg. His eyes were a calm, level brown, eyes that had learned in the worst places on earth to stay quiet and stay watchful, and give nothing away, eyes that did not get louder when the world did. That stillness was the thing people most often misread about him. They saw a quiet, limping man and assumed quiet meant weak. They were always wrong, and they were about to be wrong in a way that would make the regional news. Travis had done 3 combat deployments with a Marine infantry battalion, the last of them in a river valley in Helmand Province, where a buried charge under a patrol road had ended his career and nearly his life. He'd come home with a Bronze Star with a combat V he never mentioned, a Purple Heart he kept in a drawer, a traumatic brain injury that turned loud, crowded rooms into a kind of physical assault, and a silence that had cost him most of the things a quieter injury might have spared. For 2 years he had barely left his house. Loud voices, crowded lobbies, sudden noise, they didn't just rattle him, they could put him on the floor. He had almost not come this weekend at all. But the battalion was holding its first full reunion since his injury, and somewhere deep down Travis had decided it was time to stop hiding from the only family that had never once flinched at what the war had made of him. He had driven 6 hours through cold rain to a mid-tier hotel, off the interstate to face a room full of his brothers for the first time. As the man he was now, he had brought the one companion who made facing any room possible. His name was Max, and he was the reason Travis Ford could stand in a hotel lobby at all. Max was an 8-year-old German Shepherd, 90 pounds of deep black and tan muscle, his coat thick and glossy and his eyes a steady amber that tracked his handler's smallest shift in breathing. He had a notch in one ear and a faded tattoo inside it because Max had not started life as a service dog. He was a retired military working dog, and Travis had spent a year fighting the paperwork to adopt the very animal that had walked point ahead of his own patrols before the easy road that changed everything. Now Max wore a service vest and did a different kind of work. He braced when Travis's leg gave out. He carved a pocket of space in a crowd when the press of bodies got to be too much. And when the sensory overload from the TBI began to pull Travis under, Max was trained to feel it coming before Travis did, and to press his full weight against his handler's chest until the man came back. He moved through the world with the clean, deliberate calm of an animal who had learned long ago the difference between noise and threat. Tonight there was a great deal of noise. There was no threat in the room except the man behind the desk. The hotel was a 4-story brick box off the interstate, the kind of place that lives or dies on the brand on its sign. And on this cold, rainy night, its lobby smelled of carpet cleaner and old coffee and the faint mildew of a building whose maintenance budget had been quietly gutted. The fluorescent panels overhead had that flat, washed-out glow that makes every late-night lobby feel like the same nowhere. Rain ran in sheets down the glass doors. Out in the lot, more cars were pulling in by the minute, headlights swinging across the wet asphalt. Marines arriving in 1s and 2s for a reunion, shaking off the rain, not yet aware of what was unfolding at the desk of the hotel where they'd all booked rooms. It was the worst possible night, in the worst possible lobby, for Parker Lowe to pick this particular fight. Parker Lowe was 31 and the general manager of the property, and he held that title for one reason. His uncle owned the management company that ran this hotel and 6 others under the same national flag. That family connection had made Parker, in his own mind, untouchable. He had run the staff ragged and cut every corner he could find. He'd let the maintenance contracts lapse, propped fire doors, and signed off on safety inspections that had never actually happened, all to fatten the numbers his uncle reviewed. He treated guests as inconveniences and employees as disposable, and twice before he had ordered service animals out of his lobby in flat violation of federal law. And twice the complaints had quietly vanished because Parker knew which forms never had to be filed. He believed, with the easy confidence of a man who has never once been made to answer for anything, that the rules were things that happened to other people. "I don't care what kind of vest it's wearing," he told Travis, loud enough for the whole lobby, leaning over the desk. "This is my hotel. It's a no-pets property tonight, and I'm not having a dog shedding all over my lobby because some guy wants a sympathy discount. You and the mutt can find somewhere else." He smiled when he said it. It was the smile of a man who has decided he's already won. Travis Ford did not get louder. He had learned, in places Parker Lowe could not have survived an afternoon in, that the calmest voice in a crisis is the one that controls it. He explained, evenly, that Max was not a pet but a federally protected service animal, that no pet policies did not apply to service dogs, that he had documentation he was not legally required to provide but was happy to show, and that he had a confirmed reservation. He kept his voice level, even as the shouting battered at the cracked place in his brain, even as the bright lights and the rising noise began to do the thing they did. The thing only Max could feel coming. The dog shifted without being told, turning his body to put himself squarely between his handler and the desk, and leaned his full 90 pounds into Travis' good leg, grounding him. Travis's hand tightened on the harness. He was holding on, and not many people in that lobby understood to what. Parker only got worse. A quiet man holding his ground enraged him in a way that a fight never would have. And he came out from behind the desk and got loud and close, jabbing a finger, and he canceled the reservation on the spot with a few taps at the terminal. "There. No reservation. Now you're trespassing." He raised his voice for the benefit of the travelers by the elevators and the Marines now coming through the glass doors out of the rain. "We've got a problem here, folks. This gentleman's refusing to leave with his animal." And it was right about then, as Travis stood absorbing all of it with a stillness that was costing him everything he had, that a young desk clerk named Bree, who had watched Parker do this twice before and had been too afraid for her job to say a word, quietly took out her phone and began to record, because some line in her had finally been crossed. She was not the only one. By the doors, a Marine still dripping rain had stopped dead and was filming too and had begun very quietly to make a phone call. The lobby was filling now. Word travels fast through men who learn to communicate without speaking, and within 10 minutes the space behind Travis Ford had quietly filled with Marines. Some he knew, some he didn't. Men in their 40s and 50s and a few much older, all of them arrived for the same reunion, all of them now standing in a loose silent crowd, watching a hotel manager scream at one of their own and his dog. None of them rushed him. They didn't have to. They simply arranged themselves, the way they'd once arranged themselves without orders, into a wall at the wounded man's back, and they watched Parker Lowe with the flat, patient attention these men usually reserved for something dangerous. Behind the desk, the young clerk named Bree had stopped pretending to work. She'd watched Parker turn away a blind woman and her guide dog in March in a wheelchair, veteran in July, and both times she'd swallowed it because she needed the paycheck, and Parker had made very clear what happened to staff who made problems. She was done swallowing it. She kept her phone low and her recording running, and when an older Marine caught her eye, she gave the smallest nod, the nod of a witness who has decided to stop being afraid. Parker, drunk on his own authority, mistook the gathering silence for an audience. He told them the police were on their way. He told Travis that the Disabled Act wasn't going to work here. And then the noise and the lights and the crowd and the shouting finally did what they had been building toward, and Travis Ford felt the floor of his own mind start to go out from under him, the roar in his ears, the tunnel closing in, the old valley reaching up through 3 years to pull him down. His knees began to buckle. And Parker Lowe looked at a decorated Marine sliding toward a panic attack on his lobby floor and laughed and said, "Oh, give me a break." Max moved before Travis hit the ground. The dog drove his full weight up against his handler's chest and held there, a warm, immovable pressure. His amber eyes locked on Travis's face, doing the one task he had been trained above all others to do, anchoring a drowning man to the surface. Travis got one arm around the dog and held on, and the two of them went down to the carpet together, the Marine and the war dog, in the middle of a hotel lobby, while a manager stood over them sneering and a circle of silent men watched the cruelty of it carve itself into their memory. And out of that circle an older man stepped forward. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, compact, in a plain windbreaker, and he moved with an authority that made even Parker Lowe go quiet without knowing why. He crouched down beside Travis and Max, said something low that no one else could hear, put a steady hand on the Marine's shoulder until the breathing came back, and then he rose to his full height and turned to face the manager, and the temperature of the room changed completely. "Son," the older man said, and his voice was calm and carried to every corner of that lobby, "do you have any idea who you've been screaming at?" He didn't wait for an answer. He told them. The man on the floor was Gunnery Sergeant Travis Ford, 3 combat tours, a Bronze Star with Valor, a Purple Heart, who had lost his leg to a roadside bomb in a place Parker Lowe would not have lasted 10 minutes. And the dog he had just mocked was a decorated military working dog who had walked point ahead of American Marines and was now a federally protected service animal that this manager had, in front of 24 witnesses and at least 3 cameras, illegally and repeatedly ordered removed. Then the older man told the room quietly, the last piece. "And I'm Lieutenant General Harlan Briggs, United States Marine Corps, retired. I commanded this man's division. I'm the guest of honor at the reunion you booked into this hotel." He looked at Parker for a long, level moment. "You picked the wrong lobby, the wrong dog, and the wrong night." Parker Lowe did what men like Parker do when the ground they've always stood on turns to air. He reached for the only thing he'd ever had. "My uncle owns this company," he said, and his voice had gone high and thin. "You can't do anything to me. I'll have all of you removed. My uncle." And the general simply looked at him, because the cheapest sound in the world is a man invoking a name he's about to discover won't save him. The Marine by the doors, it turned out, had spent the last 20 minutes on the phone. To the National Brand's 24-hour corporate line, to a reporter he knew, and to the video already climbing fast across every feed in the region. And the general, who in retirement sat on more boards and knew more powerful people than Parker Lowe would meet in 3 lifetimes, made one more call himself, to a man whose name was on the corporate masthead far above any uncle. By the time the police arrived, they found not a trespasser but a room full of veterans, a sobbing desk clerk ready to testify, a manager who'd broken federal civil rights law on camera, and a retired 3-star general explaining the situation in terms that left very little room for confusion. The officers, to their credit, sorted out quickly who had broken the law in that lobby, and it was not the Marine on the floor. It all came apart for Parker Lowe in the few dark hours before dawn, and it came apart faster than even he could follow. The video was everywhere by 2 in the morning. A disabled, decorated Marine and his war dog collapsed on a hotel floor while a smirking manager stood over them. And the National Brand, whose entire value was its name on that sign, did the math in minutes. But the video only opened the door. When corporate's compliance team pulled the property's file that night, alarmed and looking for the manager's history, what they found was the rest of it. The lapsed maintenance contracts, the fire doors Parker had propped and chained, the safety inspections he had signed off on that had never happened, the violations he had been hiding for 2 years to make his numbers look better for his uncle. They alerted the authorities they were legally required to alert. A fire marshal and a county inspector were at the hotel by 5 in the morning, and what they found in the stairwells and the utility rooms was bad enough that they did not wait until business hours. By the time the sun came up over the wet interstate, 2 notices were taped to the glass doors Parker Lowe had screamed across the night before. One from the corporate brand revoking the franchise and stripping the flag from the building, and one from the county ordering the property closed for immediate life safety violations. The hotel was, by sunrise, exactly as the morning would prove, shut down. By the following spring, the account had settled the slow, honest way real accounts do. Parker Lowe was fired before the doors were even locked. His uncle, facing a federal civil rights complaint, a wave of code violations, and a public relations catastrophe with his own name attached, distanced himself so fast that Parker found himself standing alone in the wreckage of the only authority he'd ever borrowed. The civil rights violation was settled. The other service animal complaints Parker had buried resurfaced and they were not kind to him. The hotel never reopened under that flag, and Travis Ford, who had driven 6 hours in the rain dreading a single lobby, found that the worst night had turned into something else entirely. The reunion was moved that very morning to a far better hotel down the road, whose own manager, a Navy veteran, met the busload of Marines at the door and refused to take $1 from any of them, and rolled out, quite literally, a red carpet for the gunnery sergeant and his dog. On a warm gold evening that May, Travis Ford sat on his own back porch with General Briggs's challenge coin in his pocket and a phone full of numbers he had not had 3 months. Before, his brothers, who had folded back into his life that weekend and refused to fold back out of it. He had started going to the reunions. He had started, slowly, leaving the house. He had even started telling a few of the stories he'd carried alone for 3 years, to men who knew without being told exactly how heavy they were. Max lay sprawled in the last of the sun at his feet, off duty, his vest hung by the door, just a dog now in the evening, fat and content and snoring lightly, the war and the work both behind him. The dog stirred, lifted his graying head, and laid it across Travis's good knee, and his tail thumped twice against the warm boards, slow and easy, and Travis rested his hand on the notched ear and looked out at our yard going golden in the falling light and understood, for the first time since the road in Helmand, that he was not standing anywhere alone. Sometimes the loudest man in the room mistakes a quiet one for a weak one, and that is the oldest mistake there is. Sometimes the person standing perfectly still while he is screamed at is not a man with nothing left. He is a man who has already given more than the one shouting at him will ever understand, and who has simply learned that dignity does not need to raise its voice. We are quick to measure people by the noise they make and slow to see the strength in the ones who make none. But God keeps a different ledger. He sets a faithful dog at the side of a wounded man, and a circle of brothers at his back, and the right witness in the right lobby at the right hour. And he has a way of reminding the proud, before the sun even rises, that cruelty toward the vulnerable is never as safe or as private or as free of consequence as it feels in the moment a man is doing it. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that quiet strength is still strength, and that no act of cruelty toward the vulnerable ever truly goes unseen. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And tell us, have you ever watched someone underestimate a person who turned out to be the strongest one in the room? Your words tonight might be the light somebody is waiting for. And if you believe in stories of dignity, brotherhood, and justice that arrives before the sun comes up, subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your family, watch over every wounded warrior facing a hard room tonight, and remind you always, your quiet is not weakness, your dignity is seen, and you are never ever alone.